Hello and welcome back again to our next video on reading comprehension. Let's move on now to the second part of the four-part divisions that we had made of the elements that we are supposed to learn how to read in reading and comprehension. And this part is the syntax or the grammar of the sentence. Now, technically speaking, syntax is a part of the grammar of a language. In fact, a fairly big part. But I need to make one clarification here before I move on with my lecture. We are going to do grammar in detail in another section of these video lectures, as grammar is a major component of other parts of the verbal ability paper as well. At the moment, though, I intend to touch upon only those topics of grammar, or those parts of grammar rather, which are going to be useful to you in reading comprehension. For example, how grammatical structures or syntactical structures help you comprehend the ideas better. Okay, now syntax or grammar has to do with the arrangement of words and phrases to create a well-formed sentence. It is the study of the combination of units of a language without reference to their meanings. For example, look at the sentence, "A cat is a dog." This sentence may not mean anything sensible. Obviously, a cat is not a dog. Yet, it is grammatically or syntactically correct as it satisfies the rules of structural arrangements of words in a sentence. Now look at the following sentence. Is a cat dog a? This sentence is not only meaningless, but it is also structurally incorrect. Thus, you can say that syntax is a set of structural rules that govern the composition of words to form clauses and phrases in a language. In simple terms, it is the study of the principles on which the sentences are constructed with the help of words in a language. Please bear in mind that I do not mean to suggest that syntax has nothing to do with meaning. Of course not. If that was so, then the order of the elements of grammar like subject, verb, object, etc. wouldn't matter. The order matters because grammar or syntactic structures contribute to the meaning of the passage or the sentence. However, there is an additional dimension here, and in that dimension, a syntactically correct sentence may not necessarily make any sense. Like the previous example given, a cat is a dog. In this example, you can comprehend the words and the relationship that the various words have to each other due to the grammatically correct order that has been used. But the sentence still does not communicate anything sensible. Therefore, the claim that syntax is the study of the combination of units of a language without reference to their meanings. For our purpose in RC, we shall restrict ourselves to the study of those aspects of syntax that contribute to the development of the ideas in the passage. We shall look at how a rearrangement of the syntax can either create ambiguity or dispel it. Similarly, we shall also examine how a certain syntactical arrangement of a sentence can clarify the meaning of an unfamiliar word. So, let's start. Let's begin by looking at the idea of syntactic ambiguity first. You may have noticed that many a times sentences are constructed in such a manner that it seems that that sentence could have more than one possible meaning. This situation is called a situation of syntactic ambiguity, when you're not sure which of the two possible meanings is the correct one. Let me give you an example of this. Look at a sentence like this. Alexander says, many of the things that his intellectual mentor said in a much less digestible form. The above example is a very good instance of syntactic ambiguity, as it is very difficult to comprehend whether the clause in a much less digestible form applies to Alexander or to his intellectual mentor. This is so because of the grammatical order used here in the arrangement of words and clauses. Sentences like these in a passage can not only break your speed of reading and ease of comprehension, but also introduce a strong element of uncertainty about the direction the argument of the passage is going to take. After all, there is no clarity over which of the two persons is qualified by the phrase in a much less digestible form. It could be either Alexander or his mentor. And if you get a question based on the relationship established between the various elements, that is, Alexander, mentor, and the clause in a much less digestible form, things can become a little uncomfortable. In such a situation, the best help that you can get will be again from the context of the passage. It is very likely that the passage will give you clues that will provide the necessary information or even suggestive hints in terms of the general tone or mood of the passage, which will then help clear up the ambiguity. Ambiguous phrases like these may also be used by the author as a matter of linguistic device to introduce a turn away from the direction in which the argument was developing so far, or as a hint of caution for the reader. You may be well advised to see the writer's statements critically and not accept his or her premise and assumptions wholesale. Thus, ambiguity of sentence structure can also suggest ambiguity of thought processes. Let me discuss this idea through citing an example from ZAT 2014. Look at the following passage. After all, the practical reason why, when the power is once in the hands of the people, a majority are permitted and for a long period continue to rule is not because they are most likely to be in the right, nor because this seems fairest to the minority, but because they are physically the strongest. But a government in which the majority rules in all cases cannot be based on justice, even as far as men understand it. Can there not be a government in which the majorities do not virtually decide right and wrong, but conscience? In which majorities decide only those questions to which the rule of expediency is applicable? Must the citizen ever for a moment, or in the least degree, resign his conscience to the legislator? Why has every man a conscience then? I think that we should be men first and subjects afterward. It is not desirable to cultivate a respect for the law so much as for the right. The only obligation which I have a right to assume is to do at any time what I think right. It is truly enough said that a corporation has no conscience. But a corporation of conscientious men is a corporation with a conscience. Law never made man a whit more just, and by means of their respect for it, even the well-disposed are daily made the agents on injustice. From this passage, let me draw your attention to this particular line. Can there not be a government in which the majorities do not virtually decide right and wrong? The above given statement has syntactic ambiguity as it can mean two things. One, Can there not be a form of government in which right and wrong is not decided by the majorities but by conscience? 2. Can there not be a form of government in which the majorities do not decide right and wrong but decide conscience? It could be conscience of the government or the decisions taken by it, and so on. This ambiguity arises because it is not clear who the agent of action is, the majorities or the conscience. If majorities is the only agent and acts upon or doesn't act upon right and wrong and conscience, then the second reading of the sentence is right. If, however, we see conscience as the agent, then the sentence would have the first interpretation, according to which it is conscience and not the majorities who will decide right and wrong. Now, if you were to locate this sentence in the matrix of other sentences of the passage, you will find that the author has used this sentence to refer to a possible situation where the conscience and not the majorities decide what is right and wrong. Particularly, examine the sentence that follows this one, in which majorities decide only those questions to which the rule of expediency is applicable. This sentence limits the role of majorities to deciding only matters of expediency, thus making it clear that it is not the agent of action in the previous sentence. The writer goes on to talk about conscience and how the only obligation he has is to do what his conscience encourages him to. Thus, this makes it clear that the author privileges conscience over majority in deciding right and wrong. Okay, there was a question based on this part of the passage this year in ZAT. The following was the question. In general, when would government of majority be good for minorities? A. When it is fair. B. When it is right. C. When it abides by the law. D. When it is conscientious. E. Such a government cannot exist. When you look at the options, you will find that options A, B and C are immediately suspect for various reasons. Option A doesn't define what fair in this case would be. What would be fair? The rule of the majority, the rule of conscience, or something else altogether? Although the passage indicates that fair is not the rule of the majority in general and implies that it could be the rule of conscience, yet this option choice doesn't suggest anything of the sort. It leaves fair undefined, therefore it is wrong. Option B has a similar problem. When is something right? Or what decides the nature of right? Majorities, conscience, or something else? Thus, this option choice is inadequate as well. Option C is incorrect because the writer draws a clear distinction between law and conscience and says towards the conclusion of the passage, law never made men a whit more just, and by means of their respect for it, even the well-disposed are daily made the agents on injustice. Thus, clearly, C is incorrect. We are left with option D and E now. The structural relationship that we drew earlier in the ambiguous sounding sentence makes it clear that conscience should decide right and wrong. The writer has stated in the previous part of the passage that fair is not that which the majority decides. He indicates that fair is that which is decided by conscience. Additionally, he has not stated directly anywhere nor implied that a fair government can never exist. Although he does say government is at best but an expedient, but most governments are usually and all governments are sometimes inexpedient. The writer's point is that government is at best a practical necessity, but ordinarily most governments and sometimes all governments are not practical or not advisable. Beyond this, he does not say that a government of majority which is good for minorities cannot ever exist. This information is not provided anywhere in the passage. Thus, we cannot assume this to be true. Considering all of the above, D is the right option here. Okay, this was the case of syntactical ambiguity. But there are many other roles that syntax or grammar also plays in a reading comprehension passage. We shall examine these roles in our next video. Goodbye till then.